What's up, everybody? It's Joshua here, and I really like to keep up on all the local, up-to-date information on the brain. It's one of the areas that I'm fascinated with. There's a few areas that I'm into. One is like ancient mythology, ancient knowledge, and another one is sound and frequency and how it relates to healing and whatnot. Another one might be oils and plants. Plants is another one, completely separate. My pharmacognosis. But as far as science goes, I have a couple of things that I'm really interested in that I keep up on. And one of them is nanotechnology, because it's a fascination of mine. One is quantum physics, and I try to understand it as best I can as a layman. And the third one, the one that I'm interested in most, is the brain. And because, you know, like in my last video I mentioned, you know, ethology, which is the study of how animals communicate with one another, and it really has to do with the structure of the brain and which parts of the brain are programmed by living, by life, by experience, and which ones are what we call instinct. As some scientists say, whatever that may be. We don't quite understand how imprinted knowledge works, but it's the same. They've done a lot of experiments where, for example, they raise the one good one is they raised a monkey in captivity where he was never exposed to another monkey his whole life, and waited till he was an adolescent, and then showed him a movie where they showed him a screaming male ape and baring his teeth. And he cowered and got into the submissive posture. What it shows is that it wasn't through the group experience of being a monkey or an ape did he learn this experience. This was a imprinted piece of knowledge that when you see this, your brain knows to do this. And this is, you know, it has high implications in my eyes, because it goes to show that even after an animal's, you know, lived into adolescence, it still has these imprints. Now, the part of it that fascinates me is the human mind and how we're imprinted with these particular ideas from birth, and which ones can we, I don't know, it's the reason why I try to understand these things is to understand people, so I don't feel like I'm separate from people, or that people are so different from one another, you know, and find the similarities in people. They've had examples, for example, some people have been raised in situations, they did brain testing, brain scans on people who were raised without, people who were passed around through the, they were orphans, okay? They were passed around through the system, gone to a lot of different families, and never really had any love. And they compared that to the brain scans of people who had grown up in families with very intense relationships, very strong bonds, and found that different parts of their brain, I mean, these were significant differences. And I think prefrontal cortex, a part that has to do with, one part that has to do with emotion, another part with cognitive ability, but that people, get off there, fly, go away. I'm right by the garbage can, I shouldn't be right here. Sorry about that. Pew. People with cognitive disorders and whatnot, you know, this can be brought on by, you know, a life experience, and it's not something people can just change overnight. And I think this is what a lot of folks expect people to just change. Like, you know, okay, you grow up, now you have love. Why can't you just be loved, you know? Folks who see others who need help but won't ask for it, and won't take it. While there's others who don't need help but are always asking for help, that kind of thing. That it's something that we've grown accustomed to behaving certain ways, and that the reason why we can't change these overnight is because you can't just change your mind. And you know the old saying, change your mind, change your life. Well, to an extent that's true, but it takes time. It's like going to school for, you know, when you start, if you become more of a right-brained person, you know, I think you'll be a much happier person. But that takes practice. You have to work towards adapting those skills to where when you look at something, you don't see, maybe you don't see technical aspects of it, but maybe artistic aspects or whatnot. But that these parts of the brain grow over time, and it takes a while. But I'm endlessly fascinated by the way that the brain, the especially the reward system. This has always been fascinating to me, that, you know, when you smoke cigarettes, nicotine releases dopamine. You know, it triggers a dopamine release. And most drugs, a lot of drugs do, and at varying degrees, but people don't realize that going shopping also releases dopamine. Watching violence releases dopamine for a lot of people. And a big one these days is being in fear. It's always been common, but it's more common on the internet because you can really see it for what it is. People are obsessed with fear because it goes on. It gives them a rush. It's like earlier when I made a video about trolls and trolling. I forgot to mention a few things. You know, it was early, and it's hard to get a grasp on all the different things I want to say about something. But that some people lash out at others because they're hoping for retaliation, because they get that feeling in their gut, that feeling that they know that they got to somebody, or the feeling that they know they're being confronted because they like confrontation. I was watching there's this show on earlier. It was it's one of those housewives show where they all argue the whole time. And it was on in the background, and I was thinking, why don't these people just get away from each other? You know, when I hear people argue in any situation, it reminds me of families that are constantly arguing. And why don't they get away from that particular situation? It's not because they don't want to get away, or I should say, it's not because they can't get away. Sometimes it's because they don't want to get away. There's relationships out of convenience for argument's sake, and that sounds silly maybe, but there are people that really like to fight because they get that rush, and that's part of their release, their adrenaline. You know, that's part of their addiction. It's an addiction just like drugs. It's the same thing. And so we wire our brains in certain ways to receive, you know, pleasure and reward through certain actions. So here's the person stuffing their face with cake and pie, and they weigh 800 pounds, and you smoke pot, how dare you, oh, you're nasty. Or, you know, vice versa, the guy who's smoking cigarettes or smoking pot and telling the guy that's stuffing his face, you shouldn't be eating so much. We all have our addictions, and there's no reason to compare them, because it's something that we do to cope with a life full of confusion about who we are and why we're here. And I think that's just the way it'll always be. Anyway, hope you're all having a good day. I'm gonna go inside and do something. Don't know what yet.